How much of US foreign policy is genuinely altruistic? And how much is it influenced by the banks and corporations that profit so tremendously from it?
America's evangelism of democracy is riddled with contradictions, not least of which this idea of promoting democracy at the point of a gun, or opposing regimes which are democratic but not in the way that America wants. So too, this idea that America's been promoting free market capitalism has also been riddled with contradictions, because the reality is that American firms tend to make most money when countries are at the cusp of change, certainly American financial firms. And in a sense, they want markets that are changing structurally, but not too free and too transparent, because they make money when markets are a bit opaque.
Is it any wonder developed nations are fighting in underdeveloped countries when so many are making so much money out of it, without ever really having to face up to or even witness the consequences of their actions?
So what if 5 million kids died in Africa because of debt last year? I got a bonus of £1 million, and if I have that conversation, I've had it with some bankers who've been in the business a long time, and they listen politely, very polite, very charming, and at the end they say, "Well, Tariq, it's lovely meeting you again," and they go back to the office and do another loan deal for Tanzania or something.
I've known a lot of terrorists, quote unquote. I've met them, I've interviewed them for books, I've known them since I was an economic hip, and I've never met one who wanted to be a terrorist. They all want to be with their families back on the farm. They're driven to terrorism because they've lost the farm. It's been inundated with water from a hydroelectric project or with oil from oil derricks. Their farm's been destroyed. They can't make a living for their kids. Or in the case of the Somali pirates, their fishing waters have been destroyed. And that's why they've turned to this. It isn't because they want to be pirates or terrorists. Now, there may be a few crazy people. There are a few crazy people with their nuts loose. There'll always be serial killers. There'll always be crazy people. Maybe Osama bin Laden's one of them. But they do not get a following unless there's a terrible injustice going on. And people are starving and they're deprived. And then they will follow these crazy people because they seem to offer an alternative. If we want to do away with terrorism, if we want to have what we in the United States call homeland security, we've got to recognize that the whole planet is our homeland.
Could it be that the charge of terrorism could just as easily be made against Western corporations, speculators and policymakers?
When we talk about terrorism, it means what they do to us, not what we do to them. And what they do to us can be pretty ugly, although it's not even a fraction of what we do to them. I mean, take, say, 9/11. That was a pretty serious act of terrorism, maybe the worst single act of terrorism in history. But it could have been worse. I mean, suppose, for example, that Al-Qaeda had bombed Washington, bombed the White House. It killed the president, installed a harsh military dictatorship, brought in a bunch of economists who drove the economy into its worst disaster in history. Well, that would have been worse than 9/11. And I'm not making it up. It happened. What's called the first 9/11 in South America, namely in Chile.
On the 11th of September 1973, the democratically elected Chilean president Salvador Allende was overthrown in a coup. A dictatorship under Augusto Pinochet was established that ruled Chile until 1990. There was the systematic suppression of all political dissidents. Thousands were imprisoned and murdered.
Who was involved in that first 9/11? It's not hard to find them. Right in Washington and London and so on. But that's off the agenda. It doesn't count. There's a principle of ideology that we must never look at our own crimes. We should, on the other hand, exult in the crimes of others and in our own nobility in opposing them.
As long as banking empires chase infrastructure and debt deals in pursuit of profit, the West will continue to export injustice through finance. Millions more will be displaced. Terrorism will thrive, and neo-colonialism will continue to end more and more lives around the world.